Welcome back to The Line. We're up to number 8 of our top stories of 2018. It's the end of the Entrada pageant in Santa Fe, part of the annual Fiesta de Santa Fe, of course. The Entrada depicted the Spanish conquistadors' return to Santa Fe after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. And Inez, this has been a long controversial part of the fiestas. Complaints have grown louder in recent years. Why was now, I'm just so curious, why was now the time, what was in the air, so to speak, that allowed this change to happen?
I think a lot of things came together in a really positive way. You started with Charlottesville,
right,
where you had the Confederate protests that led to violence and death. The Entrada a couple of years ago happened right after that, and we had our own protests. Right. And it started people really thinking about, you know, whether what was happening in New Mexico resembled the Confederacy, didn't resemble the Confederacy. And the protests got louder and more potentially violent. Mm-hmm. So then you had a fiesta 2 years ago where you had police officers on the roof of the Palace of the Governors, right, and it looked like we were going to have a riot below. Right. And nothing happened in terms of people being hurt, but there were arrests, and it was just really unpleasant. It ruined fiesta. And the people kind of behind the scenes, not the loud talkers, but the people who put on the fiesta, the pageants put on by Caballeros de Vargas, mm-hmm, which is a group that is in charge of taking care of the statue of the Virgin Mary that is at the heart of fiesta. Those people, some of the people from Indian tribes, some of the city officials, they started talking about what can we do differently, not to deny Hispanics their heritage, mm-hmm, but to say what is our collective heritage. Mm. Because the moment of reconquest or return is the moment where the unique New Mexico culture was born. And there's a way to celebrate that that includes everybody. Right. And instead of continuing to divide, Santa Fe chose to come together, mm-hmm, and to respect Pueblo people's objections, but to also not tell Hispanics, well, go away, you shouldn't celebrate this, you're evil conquerors. Mm-hmm. And, you know, for me, as a person whose people did come back, and who's married to an Indian man, it was a really nice resolution because I believe that there is something in our culture where we come together, mm-hmm, that gives us strength and is an example for the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And while we were fighting, we did not have that. And the unity celebration they had, which was full of different religious groups and different Indians and different New Mexicans and different all sorts of people, was just really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm, I think it's an example that you can not talk past each other, but talk to each other, right, and come to a great resolution. I like the way you put that. It's very interesting. And Mary, when you think about the idea that there could be changes focused on reconciliations even more going forward, something good has come of this. You know what I mean? It seems so like something was rising. We weren't quite sure how it was going to all play out. But now we've crested this wave, and it looks like, as Inez was saying, something really, really good could come out of it, including the Catholic Church, by the way, I should mention. They're in this as well. So,
yeah, this could have gone a lot of different ways.
Right.
And it was I think also arriving at this point is a turning point. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot to sort out in the state. Mm-hmm. I think that activists still have their list of things that they want to see changed, sure, at this point. And mm-hmm, so yeah, this was a big moment. I mean, mm-hmm, it's an important story on the list because mm-hmm, when we're talking about New Mexico, mm-hmm, and we're talking about like the identity of the state and how the state presents itself to the world as a tricultural location. And that was a story that I think all parties needed to.
That's right. You know, Andy, we're not immune. I appreciate that Charlottesville was brought up. We're not immune to the forces of social nature, so to speak, that even here in New Mexico, we have to respond. It's like a wave. You can't stay still. And so for you as a reporter, kind of, you're not a Santa Fe guy, neither am I, but from the outside looking in, how did you assess that situation looking at it from afar?
I think it's something that's probably going to be ongoing, not necessarily with this, but the same topic, of the idea that to hear everybody out, right, make sure that there's always going to be a group of people that feel like they're underheard or their mm-hmm, voice is not being amplified enough. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably sort of an ever-moving, ever-changing situation, not just with Entrada, but mm-hmm, just around New Mexico. We've got kind of a diverse history here in New Mexico, right, like Inez was talking about, kind of the convergence of a lot of different cultures coming together and mm-hmm, trying to conserve things that we think are important, but also sort of not have have a real history, a real look at what happened. You know?
That's right. You know, Jeff, when I think about it as well, when I think about the situation Inez mentioned about, you know, the cops on the rooftops and there was an arrest, One of the new dynamics of reporting is live video. And a lot of that was live as it was happening. And a lot of us got to peek in as it was going on. I think for a lot of the public, everyone, even if you're outside of Santa Fe, said, okay, wait a minute. This doesn't feel quite right. Something's kind of icky here. There's got to be a better way to do this than watching somebody get arrested for a celebratory event, for gosh sake. So in the coverage of this, you know, it's hard to get it on the ground right in real time, but there's a lot of follow-up, isn't there, for stories like this? Because you get a feel for what people want to see for changes out in our culture.
Yes, and I mean, certainly from the Santa Fe Reporter, we had a guy who was one of our reporters who was in the middle of all of this.
That's
while
right.
It was all sort of happening and reporting from the ground and then reporting later on. Look, I think it's important to mention that this did bubble up and it did sort of bubble over. I think we did all figuratively and potentially literally dodge a bullet when this thing got as hot as it got. But this isn't a new conversation in New Mexico. And the conversation about Confederate monuments in the South and in the southeast part of the country, that's not a new conversation either. I do think that part of the reason that it got so hot here around the Entrada pageant is because it felt like that was the time to go ahead and say it. Like we have our own thing going on with this. The other thing I'll say too is that, you know, yes, it is terrible to see somebody get arrested. It's terrible that you know, we ended up with a bunch of photographs that our reporter took of police with you know, big Barrett 50 cals standing up on top of buildings overlooking this event. But I'll also say that and it may not be the best way to resolve these kinds of things by screaming and yelling at one another, but sometimes the screaming and the yelling forces the people who do actually have the power to make things change to have those quieter conversations and ultimately end up with what I totally agree with Inez was a really lovely result, at least in terms of this. But I don't think this story is anywhere close to over. Maybe it is as far as the Entrada pageant, but there's going to be an awful lot more to be said.
You think about, again, I have to reiterate, Inez, you know, it could have split the city for a generation, literally, if things had really gone badly. You know, people would have taken sides, it would have been just something all over again. So I want to follow up with something I asked Mary. You know, clearly the conversation's not over in Santa Fe, and a lot of folks are in that conversation now, including the church. Where do you anticipate this possibly going down the road from here? Are there other good things that could happen from this conversation as well?
Definitely. There are pockets of resistance to this among the Hispanic community, the old Hispanic community, and I think that's going to bubble up. So I expect that. There's going to be more conversations about how Fiesta is presented in the schools, and that has potential for conflict. But it's a conversation that's worth having, and I think going forward, though, the good parts of it, they are looking at the period from Fiesta to Indigenous Peoples Day, the old Columbus Day, as a period to celebrate Native achievement. So they have done a lot of things this last year, and it's going to grow every year. And we have an Indigenous Peoples Day that I think it's the first Monday in October, second Monday, whatever it is. And they had dances, they had speeches, they had all sorts of coming together on the plaza, and they're going to be doing more of that. So the idea, again, is to look at how we work together as a culture and what we have learned from each other, and to look at the ways that New Mexico is richer because we all exist. So I think going forward, there's nothing but positive if we accept it in that spirit. And the point about the church is really important because the rector of the cathedral, Adam Ortiz, took a very brave stand because many of his parishioners were very upset that he wanted to end the Entrada. He's from an old Spanish family. That's his history. He loves Our Lady. And he was instrumental behind the scenes in the talks in making sure this got done. Archbishop John Wester said, we're not going to do this anymore. And the church in the past, as Fiesta's fights have gone over the years, has actually not participated in Fiesta when it got mad at the Fiesta Council. So I think had they not come together, that could have been a result. And we dodged all of that, and we have this, you know, this presentation that really brings all the communities together and looks at how strong we are together.
Right. God, this could be a year people look back on 10, 15 years from now. You know what I mean? And say, this was the moment. It just worked out. Good stuff there. Moving on to our seventh biggest story of 2018. That's the legacy of Governor Susana Martinez, who wraps up her 8 years in office in just a matter of days, actually. We've talked a lot about this one on the show in recent months, but if you had to pick one moment, one issue that defines her time, Andy, What do you think that would be?
One thing I kind of have in my notes here is that the interesting thing about her vetoing the hemp legalization is that it's something that she clearly was against before. There's other veto messages from previous years where she outlined specifically what she has a problem with it. I mean, because this came up, I think, in 2015. And one of her reasons before was that she was worried that law enforcement wouldn't be able to identify a hemp plant versus, you know, a plant with THC in it. And so I think it's sort of ironic that she was clearly against this and had put that message out there, and this was one of the ones that she just didn't put an explanation on. And she seemed very adamantly against it, and now this is one that's actually picking up steam and moving forward.
Because Mexico State's in the game now, the feds are now in the game.
They're
now.
putting stuff into
Exactly.
place, and I think
Yeah.
you're seeing companies already pop up
Yeah.
that are trying to be manufactured.
I've had this conversation about that hemp thing with so many people. It's interesting you mentioned that there's a feeling like a giant bullet was dodged. Now imagine if that veto had stuck, we'd be sort of behind again, a wave that's moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because I know it's again in the Farm Bill. Like, it's not the first time it was in the Farm Bill. But
Right.
that was, I think, in 2015 where they kind of put it in there and left it up to the states. I think Kentucky jumped on it early on. So it's hard to say if it was vetoed, would it be done on the federal level and we'd still be in the same spot? I'm not sure.
That's a good point there. Absolutely. Jeffrey, your big takeaway from these 8 years of the Martinez administration?
I just would want to say a couple of things. There have obviously been some scandals, as there are in any gubernatorial administration in any state. The one that I think gets less discussion that really will stick with me, I think, is the SNAP scandal. This is a situation in which government officials were ordering their subordinates to add assets to people's emergency food stamp applications so that they couldn't get food. That is an unconscionable act by government. So that'll be the one that maybe won't get talked as much about as some of the other things that happened during her time in office, but that's certainly one that I'll remember. I'll never forget first reading the revelations from the courtroom about that story. A couple of the other things, speaking of the vetoes, and this isn't one of the ones that got overturned because she did actually send a message. This to me is one of the things that sort of reminds me that she really did govern as a prosecutor, and there was I never really saw that shift from that sort of prosecutorial mindset into, oh, this is a much bigger job than working as a prosecutor. And that's when she vetoed the solitary confinement bill that passed the legislature. And in that particular instance, the veto message said, this is a really valuable tool for corrections officers, and I don't want to take it away from them. The corrections officers had endorsed the bill. They had gone in and helped to revise the solitary confinement reform bill that she ultimately went on to veto. So that to me was just this sort of real kind of microcosm or kind of pointed example of her governing philosophy. And the other one, I'll be the broken record one more time, was the transparency problem. Right? She promised the first time she ran and the second time she ran that she would have the most transparent administration in the history of the state of New Mexico. It has been anything but. And for those paying attention and keeping score at home, they stopped saying it the last couple of years.
Good point.
So there have been real problems with access and getting information out of that administration. I know most of what I said was negative, but those will be the things I remember.
I appreciate this. The SNAP thing should not be forgotten. Thank you for mentioning that. Inez, your big takeaway from this administration?
I think what has surprised me continually is the inability to adapt to the situation. You go in saying, I'll never raise taxes. That's common for a Republican governor, and it's something, taxpayers like to hear. And yet you're short. And the Democrats give you some ways to raise money, doing things like, charging trucks more to drive across the state of New Mexico when we charge way less than other states around us. But no, you can't do any of that.
That's right.
Someone comes and tells you behavioral health systems are defrauding the federal government. As a prosecutor, you would think that you would actually do some investigation to see if it's true. Right. But no, in one fell swoop, they basically dismantled our behavioral health system. There was no adaptation after that happened to try to make something work. People were basically left on their own. On the plus side, she did accept the Medicaid expansion, which I think is her biggest legacy for good as governor. And for that, I think people who need health insurance will thank her.
Mary, your top line takeaway from the administration?
I think I might have two.
Please. You can
So
have
the
more than
first
that.
one in one word would be gridlock. And I think that's going a little bit to what Jeff was saying earlier. Her big push and focus, I think, and wish probably for her legacy to have been related to fighting crime. In the end, I think it's arguable that very little of what she had championed is law now. And I think it was an interesting debate at the beginning with her and the Democratic legislature deciding what to pass and what they wouldn't go for. Like, for instance, the three strikes law, mandatory minimums, which are not laws now, but that she had pushed for several years. In the last legislature, you began to see that the relevance for those top issues for her weren't there.
Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And then I was going to say, for her, and I think what we might hear from, at least in the media, is this touting that the state is doing well financially, and that she got to get us here through rejecting tax hikes. But we went through some painful periods, and obviously we're always at the whims of the gas industry or oil and gas, and so it's hard to know how that one is going to look several years from now.
That's a good point there. That's all the time we have on those topics. But when we come back, it's the 6th biggest story of 2018 with our all journalist line panel.